Politics and the private sector have a symbiotic relationship. On one hand, the private sector needs politicians for business protection and creating the enabling environment needed for business to thrive. While, on the other hand, politicians need private business as a source of political campaign finance donations. Thus, business companies and corporations, local and international, target the politicians who work in government as a strategy to win big ticket deals, such as infrastructure construction and supply of military hardware or equipment. The fact that governments often spend over 60% of their total national budgets on public procurements attracts the interest of private business. Thus, businesses take keen interest in who gets to occupy political office. The practice is that when businessmen make political finance contributions, they expect contracts and other benefits in return. Sometimes criminals hide under the umbrella of private sector and make political contributions with the intention that if they are seen to have friends in high elective office, the police will be tempted to avoid investigating their activities too thoroughly. It's against this backdrop that RACFIM intends to organize the Thief Symposium interrogating private sector and political finance in Africa. Thank you so much. And that's the reason why we are here today and why we focus on the private sector and political financing in Africa. And your candid conversations will help us shape how these two should interact to improve both the private sector and how it interacts with our democracy. Dr. Daniel Walyemera, you are welcome, and please come and give us your keynote address.
Thank you very much. Because I'm a teacher, I like you moving around. Sorry about that. Thank you very much for those kind remarks and introductions. I would like to thank Henry and the organization. I was telling him when we were seated there that this is a subject that many people, including professors of law, including people who do politics, including all manner of people who are into human rights, take lightly or take jokingly. Yet it's a very serious subject. And as we're going to see, it affects many areas of our lives. It can affect the economy. It can affect human rights. It can affect the decision-making of key institutions of government. It can affect social services. It's so wide-ranging that it's a surprise that people are not paying attention to this issue called campaign finance. I told Henry that when I was a student and I was defending my thesis, one of the very eminent professors in the country said, "But is that a researchable topic?" That's the question he asked when I was defending. But this is a very serious topic. And I want to thank Henry and the organization, because much of the work that you find on campaign finance in Uganda cites the work of this very organization. And I have not declined a single invitation to come to be part of this organization and its activities, whether paid or unpaid, and I'll continue to do so. Okay, so that's about it. So that's my outline that I'm going to go through. Since I just have 20 minutes, I'll try to be as fast as possible. And when I'm teaching, I'm told I've come across literature that says the attention span of people is about 40 minutes. So I'll try to be as fast. Since I just have 20, I hope I'll keep your attention to it. Okay, so you see at the introduction, I'm indicating that campaign finance is a public good, but I highlight the word regulated, and it's for a purpose. I'm indicating there that campaign finance enables the nurturing of democratic values in society, and I've given the examples there. It enables a functional political party system. If you have a country that does not have political parties, which political parties do not have nursery beds, I usually call them nursery beds, for nurturing leaders, then you're going to have challenges having quality leaders eventually at the top. So campaign finance can do that. It is also a tool that can be used to mainstream affirmative groups. If you go to countries like France, you find that a political party is given money on the basis of those mainstreaming activities. How many women have you presented as candidates carrying your party flag? How many youth have you presented? How many disabled have you presented? How many ethnic members of the ethnic groups have you presented? It's on that basis in France that you will receive either more or less money from the public purse to do your political activity. So it can also be used to mainstream these groups at decision-making levels. Then the other one is it protects political equality of opportunity. Obviously, when we're going to the polls, ideally we should be equal in order for us to have a proper competitive electoral process. If we're not equal, then they won't be. I mean, you've heard of the word, and many scholars have written on this, where they say that was not an election, it was a selection. Because everybody knows that whereas the election is being held, it's a foregone conclusion on who is going to win. So regulated political financing then enables equality of opportunity and proper electoral competition. Then it also strengthens the autonomy of politicians, the independence of politicians. He has talked of the businessmen who are not independent because they have to give so much money, but politicians also need to be independent. Many of you, I don't know whether there's an MP here, but many of you know that there are places now that have just become like deal houses. They are not doing exactly what it is they're supposed to do. They're just transacting. If we make some noise, okay, how much do you have to give us so that we continue? So political financing in a political party would enable that politician to be independent of these interesting influences to make decisions that are for the benefit of all of us as a community. So I indicated regulated. Here I'm saying the unregulated financing of political parties and campaigns can cause serious challenges to the economy. In my opening, my off-the-cuff remarks, I indicated many problems, but here I'm indicating it can cause policy capture. The debate that a country should be having can be captured by a few people. And consequently, they may derail the national agenda of a country. Why? Because they have the money and they are influencing civil society groups, they are influencing activist citizens to post on Facebook, social media, and so on. And I know some of you who may be working with intelligence services, you know you do this kind of thing very well. That we are still discussing the death of somebody, then you bring a very interesting story. We're still discussing poison, then you bring something else. So in the similar sense, the way the intelligence services work, you can have a policy capture if you have unregulated financing. And that policy capture can be taken up by people who have the money and people who have a say or influence over politicians, and that obviously can include the private sector. It can cause inflation. Akim here has done a study, I think for the 2016 elections, Henry, where you indicated that there was 2011 elections. Immediately after the 2011 elections in Uganda, we had very serious issues with inflation, and it can be partly attributed to the amounts of money, unregulated amounts of money that entered into our Ugandan economy. It can cause corruption, especially political corruption. Henry has been talking about the examples here. And most importantly, the more recent word is state capture. So I'm giving South Africa there as an example. Many of you who are in the press are hearing about a commission of inquiry appointed to discuss this issue in South Africa. Just two Indian brothers went to the extent of even appointing ministers in the South African government because they had captured the government. They were appointing key executive directors of key government institutions. They were appointing ministers. All this has come out in that report by the current CJ of South Africa, who was then the deputy CJ who was appointed to chair this commission. So I've indicated that unregulated finance can cause all those problems. And because it can cause all those problems, if political parties simply just concentrated on raising money from the private sector because they need to feed, they need to pay off their way back into power, you're going to have challenges with the provision of social services. And Henry still gave an example here of people being asked to fund. You've heard of many groups here. I'm going to mention one group. You've heard of many groups of rich people who, in our business as the public, are busy going to all these offices where serious decisions are being taken and they are getting the mega deals. And when it comes to the public procurement rules, which are present, which should enable competition so that we get quality social services, those public procurement rules are put aside, and these people who have been dealing in the night are then given these deals, and then they give us poor quality roads, they give us poor quality dams, they give us, we had a problem with one of our dams. Those are some of the challenges that we would get. And we're going to shortly discuss what other regions have done. For example, Europe has established rules on how you do these kinds of things. Obviously, because of that, if you have an election happening just before the election, you're going to have, as he has said, you're going to have businessmen saying their profits will be low. But then their profits will be low before the elections. After the elections, if they have paid the proper people, they are going to make a killing. So it's both ways. They are making a loss here, but after the elections, they are going to get money. Yes, to them, it works. I don't know why they didn't tell you that they also, after the elections, they also make a very serious killing. Businesses make very serious profits. So here they make losses, but after they make, because then they are being given business deals, they are being given public procurements without actual processes. You've seen some of the letters circulate on your social media where a construction of a road, of key infrastructure and key decision makers in the country are saying, no. I have talked to these people and I have found that they are competent. Please forget about the public procurement rules. Give them that infrastructure project to deal with. So that's a real challenge. So consequently, we must have regulated financing for our political activities. We must have regulated financing for our political activities. Even if I only have 20 minutes. We must have regulated political financing for our activities. Very important. And not only should that regulation be in place, but we should know where NRM is getting this money that Henry is always talking about. Trillions of shillings, billions of dollars, where FDC is getting this money, where NUP is getting this money. If it's coming from the US embassy, yes, let them tell us, so that we know if Bobby Bobby Chagulanyi, he's even my student, former student. If Honorable Chagulanyi is saying certain things, then we will know that possibly the financing that he has got from this place is influencing why he's saying so. But at least it will be transparent. Everybody will know that's one of the reasons that's informing his decision making. And then we will take him on, because his interests are not in the US. His interests are here in Uganda. For us, his interests are for us to benefit us as Ugandan citizens. So some of the sources I'm indicating there include public or private sources, but obviously here in this discussion, I'll concentrate on the private sources, because the private sector then is in the realm of private sources of funding. The international framework has that provision. I didn't want to bore you because I'm a lawyer, I like citing provisions, but I'm sorry. But it indicates that there must be transparency in the activities of political parties. And this is the whole convention that has very, very many countries that have assented to it, that have signed it. It has the force of law worldwide. So whatever provision that you find in there has the force of law on each member country that has signed this convention. So it says there that transparency in the funding of candidates for elected public office, and where applicable, the funding of political parties. There must be transparency in these activities. It cannot be this hidden arrangement of Kwagalana and so on. The Indian community, they disappear into State House. We don't know at what time of the night what they are cutting. We must know, because it concerns us. So you also have the ICCPR. The ICCPR is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Article 25 discusses electoral activities, discusses citizen participation in the governance of the country. You also have many other treaties on human trafficking, terrorism, money laundering that discuss the issue of campaign financing, but that have a relation to political financing. You can find some of these examples of dirty money in South America. So in some of the South American states, mafias have taken over some of the decision-making in governments, because there is no regulation of that money and how it comes into the issue of politics or governance of the country. So you find that you have mafias, you have traffickers, you have drug dealers who are financing politicians, who then take up positions, who then take orders from these criminal syndicates. But obviously, we must guard against it, because it can happen here. And in Kenya, it has happened. You can look at it. In Kenya, it has happened with, I think, the previous government or the Kibaki government. So we also, at Africa level, we also have that convention, the Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption, 2013. It prohibits illicit financing of political parties, and also advocates for transparency. Henry has been talking about transparency. This convention and the others that I'm going to mention in the next slide, which are sub-regional. When I say sub-regional, it means West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, are not specific to political financing. They are broad conventions that discuss corruption generally. And as you well know, aware, there are various forms of corruption. There's petty corruption, there's grand corruption, there's political corruption. There's all manner of corruption. The women recently have also come up with one called sextortion. There's corruption that involves sex. And increasingly, there are also forms of corruption beyond the kind that we're talking about here. So the challenge with these Africa conventions and sub-regional conventions, we have the SEDAC protocol there. We have the guidelines and principles, which are quite recent. We also have the ECOWAS protocol on corruption. At EACU level, we have the Integrity and Anti-Corruption Bill. It was passed in 2021, and it's waiting as sent by the Summit of Heads of State. But it's not purely an issue of general corruption. I think they're discussing more of corruption within the Secretariat of the ESC, because there's been a lot of corruption. There's been a lot of corrupt activities within there. Possibly with time, we hope that it will be expanded to take care of all the other forms of corruption. Indicated that. So at national level, when you look at the African level, you find that the national legal regimes gravitate between the libertarian and egalitarian ideology. And I'm going to shortly explain that. So the libertarian ideology is, as you hear, it's very liberal. It indicates that if you're very strict with these campaign finance activities, then you're violating people's right to free speech and association. People must freely associate. People must freely speak. People must freely mobilize for monies to do whatever it is they want. So that's the ideology. And consequently, then, if you talk about campaign finance, then you're going to find very weak regulations because of that mind view. And as a result, you have very few people taking decisions. You have a very small cabal of people, whether it's a family or an individual or a clan or a tribe, that are making decisions. And that's very predominant on the African continent. And the US, by the way, is also very popular for this, because they allow people to fundraise as and when they wish. Though there are limits on the various categories. I don't have time to go into that. So the egalitarian approach has many countries in Europe using that. And for it vouches for very restrictive management, very, very regulated management of money in politics. And you have countries like Germany that go with this approach. There are very few countries on the African continent that have this approach. Tunisia is one of the very few countries that has that approach. Initially, with the coup that happened, Arab Spring, with the coup that happened against Ben Ali, you have Tunisia being very aware of its democracy values, and consequently, initially, they indicated that there was not to be any single cent coming from private sources that would fund their political leaders or political parties. But then with time, they thought it would be challenging, because you see, the government doesn't have all the money, and yet for their genuine political activities that require money. So they have now scaled back on that, and have allowed a window for private sources, for money from private sources. But initially it wasn't there. The politicians, the political parties were complaining that their monies that had been given from the public purse wasn't enough. So they've allowed a small window for Tunisia. So Tunisia is one of the few countries that allows that. Worldwide, you could also talk of Israel. Israel also, about 98% of its money that circulates within political parties and political candidates is public money. So only about 2% is from private sources, and it's highly regulated. So I've already indicated the sources. It can be from public or private. So one of the key issues is there in funding. If you're talking of a regulatory framework here, especially on the African continent, you're going to find countries that have limits on how much you put into your purse as a political party. Uganda is one of those countries. I've given you a country that totally had abandoned any private money. That's Tunisia. It was the only country on the African continent, but now it has scaled back to a small percentage from private sources. You have other countries that have a mix of public and private. Uganda is one of those. Then you have other countries that only deal with private sources of funding. There is no public funding at all. The other thing that you'll find in all of these national regimes is that they usually have spending caps. for political parties and independent candidates. I don't think we have that in Uganda. And then the other issue that you find, Kenya has it. The other issue that you'll find is financial reporting. So after you spend, before the elections, after you spend the money, you must account. Here I know that political parties account annually, I think according to Section 10 or so, 12 or 10 of the Political Parties and Organizations Act. But many countries, you have, after you've spent, you have to report, usually to an election management body, which then scrutinizes your state accounts. And then the auditors also must verify that whatever it is that you're saying is indeed what you're saying. The idea is to have integrity in terms of how you're spending money as a political party or as a politician. But I'm going to come to the other challenge of that reporting, is that many of the African countries, you have cash transactions. There are very few countries where cash transactions can be rejected. South Africa is one of them. There are certain thresholds of monies where you will not transact. Actually, South Africa is one of the few countries where if you have US dollars, it may become very challenging for you to use them, even just on the street. I've been to a couple of African countries. I've not been to another country that is that restrictive in terms of how its money moves about. But many other countries, including Uganda here, if I'm a politician and you have put up these rules, spending caps, all I have to do is go with the Honorable, my mama there, go with Henry, go with the Mzee there, and him, and then all of us divide up the monies, the US dollars, into so much. Then the other one comes from Kisoro, this one comes from Busia, the other one, and then we come here and we begin to use it for our political party. So in terms of reporting, we may have challenges with that. But also we may have challenges with the illicit financial flows. I've talked of South America that has challenges with dirty money that's coming from trafficking, that's coming from drug dealing. Then I've talked about the audit oversight. In Uganda here, the Auditor General must audit your books. In other countries, you find it's the electoral management body or the Auditor General or Parliament or the courts, the electoral courts. Then in all the regimes here on the continent, you have sanctions, and 40 countries provide for fines if you do not abide by the rules, loss of public funding. If you don't abide by the rules, 17 countries do not give you public money again until when you make amends with that. Imprisonment, you have 34 countries on the African continent that will imprison you if you do not comply with the rules on political finance. I've given the example of Tunisia, I've given the mix. By the way, for Tanzania, it's the Minister of Internal Affairs who decides how much money you spend. It's very interesting. You can look at their 2010 Act. Then, as I've indicated, in other countries, you have total private funding. What are the sources of funding? If it is private funding, you have membership fees. I belong to a political party here. I don't know whether the NRM is faring very well via membership fees, but there's no political party that survives as a result of membership fees. Maybe in South Africa, you have the ANC that collects a bit of money, and a couple of other places. You have self-funding, and self-funding here can also create a problem since we're talking of the private sector, because you have individuals who are extremely rich, who have no limit on how much they can give to a political party. So they can come and give. And I had a conversation with a colleague the other day, and I was saying, but we're in a very poor country. Just imagine there are people who have hundreds of millions of dollars. If we did not regulate how money gets into politics, and one came with $200 million or 300, we may capture some of our key government institutions. And it's a private individual. Because we know of billionaires, we know of people who have 500 million. There are very, very many people. So it's a very serious issue. If, for example, you're talking of self-funding, but the self-funding has no limit. This member of a political party has no limit on how much money he can give to the party. Then you have foreign donations. Uganda here has limitations on that. Then you have corporate donations. 12 countries on the African continent refuse that. They do not allow corporate donations because of what Henry was talking about. Policy and state capture by those corporations, if they are very, very wealthy. The example I've been giving of individuals could as well apply to corporations. If the corporation is very wealthy and you have no limits on how much they can pay NRM, they will pay so much. And I've given examples there. For example, Uganda, if I give you the example of the Indian Association, Professor Lwanga Lunyigo has written a book called Uganda, an Indian Colony. And in that book, he says, and by the way, Professor Lwanga Lunyigo is not in the opposition, he's seated, I think, right in State House. And in that book, he says 34,000 Indians in Uganda are in charge of 62% of Uganda's economy. And many of these Indians are in the manufacturing sector. And many of these Indians belong to the Indian Association in Uganda. 62%. I don't know what, I haven't looked at the population clock by Uganda Bureau of Statistics, but I think we're about 43 million Ugandans. So if these 34,000 Indians are in charge of 62% of our economy, and we're 40, maybe 43 or 46 million Ugandans. If we do not see how they are dealing with the President Museveni, how they are dealing with the BSJ, how they are dealing with the Honorable Chagulanyi, what can they do to us? What can they do to us in view of the fact that they have these amounts of money and that they are meeting them, they are taking tea here, they are going to their houses, and these are the Indians, Indian factories, Indian-owned factories that should be giving us taxes. So if they go to State House and they got tax exemptions, what will that do to our tax collections? What will that do to our policies? What will that do to our national agenda as a country? You've heard they are saying, okay, let me not go there. I don't want to be quoted. And since there are very serious laws being passed. Okay, anyway, so you have 12 countries that prohibit donations from corporations. You have no data for Comoros, Djibouti, Swaziland. I've given examples of Botswana. There's a corporation there that does diamonds called De Beers, and has kept the political party in Botswana ruling for the longest time possible. It's one of the longest ruling parties on the African continent. You have South Africa, you have ANC with Heritage Power, which allegedly bought shares on behalf of a company, but was found that this money eventually ended up in the ANC. You have Bosasa that gave money to Cyril Ramaphosa when he was a candidate. You have the Democratic Alliance is one of the key opposition parties in South Africa. It's more white-leaning. When I say white-leaning, I mean white people leading. They received money from a German businessman, and this money was brought to the public, and it was considered illegal money, illegal financing. You have the state capital inquiry that I've just talked about. In Kenya, you have Martha Karua. BAT gave her a lot of money when she was a presidential candidate in the previous elections, I think 2017, if I'm not mistaken. And it was found that that was illegal. So I'm told I have 7 minutes. So I'm going to rush through this quickly. Actually, this is the substance. So, but I need to give that context. So what can the private sector do? What role can it play? And it depends on whether your approach is libertarian or egalitarian. So if it's libertarian, then they can give all the money that there is, but I've indicated the challenges of that. If it is egalitarian, then the private sector will play a very lively role, a very transparent, lively role, because we shall know how the private sector is dealing with our key government. I've indicated there that third parties include the private sector, and If you are taking the egalitarian approach, then you must restrict how the private sector then engages with government institutions. Europe is doing this. They are lobbying regulations, and those regulations say when the Indian Association of Uganda takes tea with our president at State House, we must know what have they discussed. There is a public register to know what activities have taken place. Obviously, people say, but this is the head of state. He must meet people in confidence and blah, blah, blah. But we're saying those rules in Europe, the lobbying regulations say if you are going to lobby for something, if you're going to lobby for a tax exemption, if you're going to lobby for a tax incentive, if you're going to lobby for better policies, we, the citizens, must know what you're doing with our president. If you're taking tea with the executive director of Uganda National Roads Authority, and you are the executive director of a road construction company, and you are in a Grand Imperial, you must tell us what tea you took, how you took it, and what you are saying. You file. In Europe, they are doing this. Why? To avoid illegal money getting into. I'm talking about the lobbying regulations. So what are the recommendations for dealing with this? I've talked about the lobbying regulations. I'm indicating to you that in Europe, they are already happening. And if Henry here has some money, he can hire some expert to do a bit of study in that area. And then we shall know how we proceed in this area, which activities are confidential if the president meeting the Indian Association, which activities should they then declare to this registry, so that all of us citizens who want to know how the president is dealing with the Indian Association go to the registry and find out. Transparency in the rules. I've indicated if you're taking tea with the UNRWA director, we should know and what you're discussing. Then there is a challenge there. South Africa has this challenge. So you have individuals who are in public institutions, who are in key sensitive public institutions, and then transition to a private company, but which private company then that gets a tender from this very public institutions the fellow has left from, or fellows have left from. So they have used their insider knowledge that there is a serious tender about to happen, a mega deal about to happen. So then they resign and create a company to do that, and then they are awarded that very work. So you and then it works both ways. You have people who are in the private sector and have intimate knowledge of something happening, and then they join the public sector. A country like South Africa has these challenges, so we should deal with that. Obviously, it raises issues of conflict of interest, but largely it raises an issue of corruption. Then academia, civil society, and the media here have a very serious role to play in sensitizing the public about this topic. I've told you of a whole professor in governance, very eminent, who told me that this was a useless topic. Actually, he was saying that I should be failed for my thesis. And the other person said, no, this is a very serious issue. Commercialization of politics is a very serious issue. And that's how I managed to survive to get my document. So the media, civil society have a very serious role to play. I said at regional Africa and sub-regional, West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, we have protocols on corruption, we have conventions on corruption, but they are not specific to this very serious issue. Why? Because the people who are the beneficiaries are the ones making the laws. But some of us now who are outside those spheres should begin to talk about these issues. So we would need a specific and comprehensive law that deals with political finance as a standalone issue at Africa level, at sub-regional level, ECOWAS, East African Community, SADC, that deals with these issues. But not just passing the protocols, because now like the protocols are there. There's one on elections, they say a few things and then it ends there. There must be structures under those protocols that then try to implement these things, but also get do benchmarking activities that then feed off each other from each country. What is the best practice in Tunisia? What's the best practice in South Africa that we can borrow as Uganda? That kind of thing. then we'll have the issue of intelligence sharing. Obviously, intelligence organizations are already doing this. There's a Financial Intelligence Authority to deal with the dirty money that I was talking about, where a government can be captured by criminals. But also from the political finance side, it is important that we deal with it. Then international actors. There are organizations that have a lot that have done marvelous work in this area. An international idea is one of them. I know Henry and his organization use a lot of their work. I use a lot of their work too. International Idea has done a lot of activities on the African continent at domestic level. You also have Transparency International that does a lot of activities around political finance. So what has this address shown? It shows that the private sector has a role to play, yes, but that role has to be regulated. Because if it's not regulated, it will lead to policy capture, it will lead to state capture, it will lead to inflation, it will lead to corruption, and it will lead to inadequate social services because the money that ordinarily we should share, all of us as citizens, is being taken away by these few individuals. And obviously it can derail our national development goals and democratic values as a country. Thank you very much.